Um, Hi, I'm Andrew, and we're all going to wear these amazing headphones. And I thought that rather than bring a stereo thing to listen to, I've actually got an Atmos session up, and we're going to hear the binaural render live. So this is an artist called Low Roar, very important artist to me. I started a record label to put out the first record 12 years ago now. Yeah, 12 years ago now. Been very, very involved in the records. It's the closest I ever get to being in a band. I play lots of instruments on it and all that kind of stuff, plus as well as produce it and mix it and all the rest of it. And the artist died a year ago tomorrow. So we've got one more record to finish, but I haven't been able to work on it yet. But I'm planning to go back through the entire catalog and mix an Atmos, but this is the first song I've done, and it's the only one I've done so far. So this is the first song off of the fifth record we put out. The arrangement at the end, where there's lots of stuff like the string quartet and the tambora and the wind chimes come back and arpeggiated stuff and the trumpets, et cetera, et cetera. That was all built to make the stereo version work at the length it was, because the outro is very, very long. And a lot of that stuff wasn't there when it came to me. The way that albums always work is that Ryan would record his stuff, then he would work with another producer, Mike Lindsay, and they would do their stuff, and then it would come to me, and I would do my stuff, and then mix it, and then that would be the album. And so when it came to me, that outro is very long. And with Ryan, I would say, like, hey, that outro is really long, we should make it shorter. And he said, no, that it's right. Like, okay, and then find ways to make it work. So for me, it's about the arrangement, things like that. But when I did the Atmos mix of it, it was amazing to be able to split all that stuff up. So instead of it all slamming through two speakers, and I know we're listening to it on headphones, so it's folding back down. But if you're any good at externalizing, like the string quartet is placed in corners, and the flugelhorns are all in the back, going left to right. And so it just let me open up so much space in the mix that I didn't have in the stereo version, because there's more space when you got a lot of speakers. So, and I think it survives going back down to stereo in the headphones in a totally different way than the stereo mix. The stereo mix at the end is very like, in a great way, whereas this sort of stays more beautiful as you get through it. So that's what's going on there. Are there questions about anything in particular?
I know a lot of people are mixing it to an object bed. Do you do that? Or do you
Well, that's
use
exactly what you're seeing here.
Okay.
So 11 through 25, that is an object bed. So if we look at the session, most things, this is an older version of my template. So there's a 712 mix bus, which most things are put to in pan. And that's because when I mixed this, Pro Tools only went up to 712. There was no wider path. My room is 914, and 916 is kind of the biggest speaker array that Dolby deals with until you get into arrays, which is a more theatrical thing. So now I have multiple 916 mix buses, but 712, and then to get to the individual speakers down here, there's also a quad height mix bus. So this is the 712 mix bus that comes in here. It gets a little bit of processing, not much, because I make my stems from the stereo mix, so they're already processed, but just a little bit of EQ and limiting just in case. But it doesn't really need it, but that's just in my template. And then if I want, instead of just left, right, up top, then I go into the quad router, which gives me front, left and right, rear, left and right. Now with the current Pro Tools, I have 906, and I've got one mix bus for each distance in the binaural settings for Dolby. So I've got 4 906 mix buses in my template. So that's 60 objects right there. That's just mix buses. So if I say, I want this mid, all I do is change the mix bus it's going to, and everything else about it stays exactly the same. So it's awesome. I can just be changing it based on what I'm hearing in the headphones, and nothing changes in the speakers. And if I'm processing, I can process it. It doesn't matter. So yeah, my template now, I use all but 3 objects. They're already all spoken for. Because
does anything get double bus to multiple output?
No, what happens though, and I don't know if I did it on this song, I've got some effects that I built for Atmos, and I don't think, am I using, that's a spread. Yeah. So I've got effects that are places. So this has a spread height thing. So what that's doing is, if we come down to Atmos thing, so Atmos spread, I don't think, oh, that's the height. So what this is, and again, this is an old version of the template. I've replaced this since then. It's lots of similar delays, but it's different times and different damping and things like that. And so I can send a little bit into this. So what it'll do is I can leave the thing in the front, in the mix bus, set to off, but a little bit of it is being sent to sometimes a circular auto panner at the top or whatever. So instead of it just being adding ambience, it's adding ambience in a space. I decide if I want the ambience to be tied to the source or to be totally different. I could have a spring reverb just in the back that's on a guitar that's just in the front. Or I can have the reverb follow it as I pan and things like that. So the decisions, it's the same, it's just you've got 15 speakers instead of 2.
These are all just aux switches, right?
Yeah. It's all standard Pro Tools stuff. And then eventually it just all makes its way. Like the object bus, I'm not going to go into too much of the routing specifically, but if you look at the mix buses, whoa, I didn't need to do that. The mix buses themselves, so this 712 router, it gets the 712 mix bus. That's what everything is assigned to, right? And then the output of that goes to this object bed 712. All that is a folder full of routers. It's just mono auxes that are being sent to objects. And those objects are panned. No, that's not what I wanted. The objects are panned so that they are just panned onto a speaker. So the left side of that mix bus goes to this, and then that goes to object 11, and object 11, if you look at it, is panned to the left speaker. So I can pan inside Pro Tools and it will go between. Now it's not as exact in the placement as object panning, but if you're at 906, it is. Because when you get to a speaker, it only comes out of that speaker, and when you're in between, it does a phantom image just like it would phantom center at the front. So everything that isn't coming out of only one speaker is a phantom placement. And as long as you have enough channels in your mix bus, you're actually the same as if you were panning an object around, but I don't have to commit to objects. And anyway, there are a million reasons why to do it one way or another.
This was initially to get around the track width limit, the bus width limitation, and Pro Tools.
Yeah, and also to give myself a mix bus, because a lot of times if I'm doing an Atmos mix of an existing stereo thing, there has been mix bus processing either during the mix or in mastering or something like that, which has fundamentally changed the attack of the drums, let's say. Like limiting and mastering can really change the groove. And I'm not saying in a bad way, like it's just different. So this allows me to, you notice on the mix bus, there's a limiter, and it's the FabFilter one, which is, at the time, it was the only true multi-channel limiter. And it's awesome, and it's very, very clean, and it does nothing. But what it has is you can hold down, I think it's shift, as you move the input, and it will move the output the same amount, so it's always unity gain, and I can just say how much limiting, ooh, now the kick and snare are doing that thing. If you're doing all objects, I would have to do it to every single object individually, and that's not going to be the same as the whole drum kit hitting that limiter. So that's the real reason for object beds, as well as being able to have wider stuff. But now Pro Tools has, up to third order ambisonics, or actually more than that. Like, it's ridiculously how wide the tracks can be, but I will still use this basic setup to do it.
You mentioned how the outro, that tune in the stereo was a little more aggressive, and then in the binaural became more beautiful. Can you talk a little bit about like your mindset when approaching Atmos mix, where there seems to be like you need to change the feeling of something, or there's a
Well, yeah, it may have been a bad way to put it. I'm never trying to change the feeling. I'm trying to preserve the feeling of it. But it was, I think that I probably put that wrong. I think what was surprising about it is it kept the energy of the outro, but there was so much more space that you got to really focus on individual things. Like the strings, instead of being this kind of almost noise when they're all playing, become individual string parts, but they still do the same job that they did. So Yeah, I'm not ever trying to change the feeling of it because you could mix a song 30 or 40 times and it'd be different every single time you did it, but most likely it would feel very, very similar on all those mixes because that's the song and the performance and the melody and the structure and all that kind of stuff, and that won't change. But what you do technically to make it feel that way can change all the time. So it's the better way to describe it is it can be more beautiful while still doing the thing it did. Whereas to cram all that stuff through two speakers, it's just a lot more dense. So you still get that feeling of it building up and building up and building up, and it
It's
doesn't
like a
feel
density,
long.
density is a good.
Yeah, yeah. And I think sometimes on rock records, if you can spread stuff out, it's the same sort of thing. So instead of, like, if you got doubled rhythm guitars and then you've got a melody guitar and then you got something else and then the solo comes in and the bass is playing the same riff, all that stuff out of two speakers is awesome. It's really, really powerful. But when you can spread that just a little bit, it's just as powerful. But now it is, excuse my French, fucking huge. Instead of just being like, oh, it's like you're surrounded by it, you're in it. And I don't mean like taking guitars all the way to the back. That usually doesn't work in that sort of context. But to be able to just spread things and like cheap drums up into the heights. So now your drum kit is taller and starts to wrap around you a little bit. It also leaves more room for the bass up front because the floor tom isn't sitting right on top of it. It's off to the side a little bit. So it's the same thing, but you've opened up this kind of landscape for all of the individual elements to be in. Something like that.
Andrew, how do you deal with the low end and LFE? Do you send the same low end to the LFE, or do you synthesize it to change the decorrelate it a little?
No, I would never do. Basically, I have a send. So the only channel of the actual bed, the Dolby bed, which I use, is the LFE, because that's the only way to get to the LFE channel.
Right.
It's just a send. And on this mix, it's on kick and a little bit on the Moog bass. So what that gives me is the Moog bass is pretty steady state, so I kind of get this sort of low-end world that the mix lives in. And then the kick is much more the rhythm of that low end. But no, it's just I'm mixing and I decide I want to put this to the sub. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But I don't synthesize for it.
Okay. Do you center much?
Not a whole lot. I mean, you can see here, like on the kick and snare, I use the divergence control to get to the center because I'm printing my own stems out of a stereo mix, so they're all stereo. I don't need to mono them up. I could,
Right.
but if I leave them hard panned and then use the divergence, if you turn your divergence all the way down, now they're just in the center speaker. Like that's it. And you can see it in the little triangle. What that shows you is where the left and right actually are, and they're right in the middle. So if you start with this all the way wide, now that is left-right, and there's nothing in the center. And so I just will start to cheat things in because there's nothing specifically in the center. So if I just have a little bit of the kick, right on this I've got kick snare, a little bit of the bass guitar, not the synth bass, and then I would bet I've got a little bit of the vocal. Yeah, a little bit of the lead vocal. All of a sudden those things are just much, much easier to hear. But if you listen to just the center channel, it's just going to be a really quiet mix of kick, bass, and snare and vocal. So, yeah.
But you use divergence for it. You don't just pan them in with the actual.
No, because it's one knob. And
Right.
the biggest thing is, for everything I do, I want to be able to, at a glance, know what's going on. And I keep my tracks in MIDI. And so if it's going to a stereo place, I can't tell where the hell
Right.
it's panned. I can glance at this, and as soon as I see a blue outline, I know I'm using divergence.
That's smart.
So yeah, I want everything there all the time. If I've got to go looking, then I have to figure stuff out, and now I've completely forgotten why I was looking for it in the first place. So I glance at it, oh cool, it's there, or it's already being cheated into the center, but I still can't hear it. It must be a sonic thing, not just a panning thing, or whatever. So it's all about being quick.
Right. So when dealing with the album, sorry if it's me only speaking, when you're dealing with the album, do you do any like additional mastering, or do you use album assembler after you're done with all the mixes?
I don't. Some people do. I don't.
So
No.
you just get all the tracks and then just
Yeah,
export
because I mean,
AES.
if I'm matching an album that exists in stereo, then if I'm sure that each track works, we already know that that works. I do pay attention to the relative levels between songs. So the very first thing I'm doing if I'm mixing an album that was in stereo is I find the loudest song on the record. That song, when I finish, will be at minus 18. If there's a song that's a dB and a half quieter, that one will be at minus 19.5. So it's always relative to the loudest track. So I don't need to go back and see if the volume is good between songs because I'm exactly reproducing the differences between the songs that happened in the stereo.
Right. So you don't actually match all the stereo masters to minus 18. You find the loudest one.
No, I do. Down here, I've got my original stereo, and I had to pull it down 8.5 to be at minus 18. Yeah, the very first thing I do is I bring the stereo mix in because I can just switch sources and hear what's going on with that. And then I use Nugent, this guy, which is awesome. And you just select it and say analyze.
It just tells you.
And it's at minus 19.2, so I don't know why I mixed this so quiet. That's weird. Anyway, but yeah, that's exactly what I do. Oh, and probably because I did the whole album. And even though I haven't mixed any of the rest of the album, I already knew that this one was 1.2 dB quieter than the loudest song on the record.
Right.
So that's why I did it. It's on purpose. So yeah, that's exactly what I do very first thing. If there is a stereo mix that comes into the session, it gets leveled down to minus 18 or relative. And then that's my thing as I go back and forth when I'm checking the binaural.
Right.
How are you automating your objects that are moving in sync?
Well, on this one, there were two things, and they won't still be in because I will have copied the pan over to object automation. So one is the Dolby Panner, Dolby Music Panner. It's like I'll just pull it up on some random track. So it's like a step sequencer. And so you notice that one thing was sort of moving opposite and it was in time. This will follow the tempo of the session and you can draw shapes and have sequencer steps and things like that. Once you've done that, you can then transfer that pan automation onto object automation. The other thing I do quite a bit, I don't think I did it on this song, but there's a fantastic plugin called Spanner, which can take any input and any, you can't even see all the possibilities here, so let me just get it from the menu. The Cargo Cult, sorry. So in this case, I can have stereo in because it's a stereo track, and you can have any output you want. So what I do is I'll take like a 7.0 input and I'll get a ball here for each one. And then there are controls. No. Hold on. Where is it? Rotate. Shift, Option, Command.
Oh, wow.
And when you have thank you very much. When you have a controller, any Yukon controller that can flip the parameters, plug-in parameters down onto faders, you can toggle that rotate, which is discrete, where you say, I want to rotate this much, and there's a version of it called spin, which just spins, and as you turn the fader up, it spins faster and faster and faster, and then when you go below zero, it spins the other way, faster and faster. So I will have my hands on two faders, one for spin and one for height, and I'm spinning and going up and down at the same time, and then I've got a SoundFlow script that will take all of that pan automation, because it's a shit ton of pan automation. It's XYZ for every single channel in the panner, and it will copy that to individual tracks that are then like my object bus, and they get routed to individual objects. It's very complicated, but it's
copying pan automation out of here,
out of the plugin
into the pan lane.
into the Pro Tools pan lane, so then that can control objects. Yeah, and it took me, half a day to figure out how to do it, but it's something I wanted to do because I wanted to be able to do it, and now I can do it really easily, over and over and over. So, yeah, it's really good.
How do you make that interesting without making it distracting?
it's just like with stereo mixing. I mean, it's you choosing your moment. You know, there's certain things that it's cool to have them moving around, and there are other things that would be distracting. So sometimes it's just you choose your moment. Like, okay, this is the instrumental section before the second verse. There's no singing. It's all music we've heard before because it's the same as the intro. So what can I do that'll keep it interesting? And sometimes moving something around is what will do that. Sometimes that's the worst idea in the world. And so, yeah, it's just something you mess with and see. Yeah.
I saw that you have like 5.1 re-render built into the session. Do you check this before you print? Or
No, that's for loudness. So I bring the 5.1 re-render in here, and then that goes to a real-time version of this. Or there's a really great plugin, if you guys don't know it. It's by Process Audio, which is the same guys who do Pure Mix. And this is all completely customizable. You can have any kind of meter you want. I don't have the re-renders actually set up for running on the laptop, but normally there's a 5.1 re-render coming in here live. And this does absolutely everything. So it's brilliant. And the LUFS that it calculates, it's within 1/10 of a dB with the Dolby one. So I don't have to keep looking at the render. I can just use this. Yeah, it's really, really awesome. And it's in my template now. Again, this was mixed a little while ago. But there are a couple of them that do that. But yeah, the standard is to use the 5.1 re-render for measuring loudness.
Is there any specific? Sorry, it's getting me. Is there any specific binaural settings you use, like for the objects for the bed zones?
No, it depends. I mean, I usually will keep the main elements of the band that are in the front wall set to off, just so they don't get messed with. But then as much stuff as possible I will have on different distances, because otherwise it's a stereo mix. There's no point. So I try and get everything else binauralized. But that's why I now have the 4 mix buses. So I can put it on mid. I'm like, I don't know about that. Switch it to far by just changing the output of the track. And everything else about it stays exactly the same. So in speakers, absolutely nothing has changed. But in headphones, I'm trying different distances just by deciding which mix bus I'm going to use.
You say lead vocal, you might not spatialize?
Yeah, usually not. Usually not. Just because the character of it will change to the point where it's like it's a totally different mix. The keyboard overdub that's doubling something, no one will ever notice that doesn't sound the same. It doesn't matter. And it's actually really cool if you happen to externalize and it goes behind you. The vocal and the kick and the snare, if those sound weird, you're no longer listening to the song. And that defeats the whole purpose of working on music. So, yeah. At the moment, I leave those set off.
Did you do anything different during the outro with the new bass compared to everything else? I noticed that moved a little differently.
None of the strings are moving. You mean the bowed bass that comes in, the really loud one?
Yeah, at the end and it starts shifting, yeah.
Yeah, it's not, I don't think there's anything crazy going on, and I think it's right up front, because that was the whole thing, is I took the string quartet, where are they? They're here. The viola 1, it's like a string quartet down an instrument. So viola 1 is basically split left-right, but on the sides. Then viola 2 split the other way because it was done from samples, and where I'm playing in the range it puts it. So they're kind of split left-right, halfway back. Then the celli are all the way in the back, and then the basses are just, they're back a little bit. They're back a little bit to fill up more speakers, and then they're going to the sub. So that would probably be what's making it feel like it might be moving. And I actually love the way the sub sounds in the binaural. I think it's awesome. It's really good. It's the only thing that's a little tricky is, at least in my room, I hear much less of the sub physically monitoring than I do in the binaural. So I've got to be careful, because if I really go nuts on the speakers and then put the headphones on, it's all you can hear. So the headphones are a really big, important part of this, because it's the way people hear it.
So what headphones do you use?
as is famously known, I use like old crappy Sonys a lot of the times, but we've been going back and forth, and I keep listening to different pairs of these on different things, and I think we're zoning in on a pair that actually is going to work for me, because there's lots of stuff I can listen to that sounds amazing. These headphones sound unbelievably great, but you also get used to what you work on, and so listening to music and working on a mix are two totally different things. And I find myself just listening because they sound so good, and I kind of forget to work. So I'm getting there, though. I'm getting there. So it's. I think we're gonna today or tomorrow actually narrow it down to like, okay, we can make this happen. And I actually brought some mixes that are in progress I'm going to listen to, because I know they have some problems, and that's the big thing: is do you hear the problems? So I'm sure I will hear them, and that'll be very depressing because there's some big problems with these mixes. But yeah. So,
Are you referencing Apple Music directly now? Because for a time you had to come through the 4K TV and recapture, right? But now,
yeah.
isn't
I
there
mean,
an update where you can now monitor
well,
directly?
Logic has it built in, so I send the 714 re-render into Logic, and then it's got the head tracking, everything. You just select the Bluetooth headphones as the output of Logic. But also, Audio Movers has been putting together a real-time version of that. That's the plugin inside of the DAW instead, so you don't have to run Logic alongside Pro Tools to do it. But yeah, absolutely, you have to check it. You know, I don't mix for it, but I don't do things that sound bad in it. Same with the Dolby binaural, like that, like with the sub. It would be a mistake to make it sound bad with the Dolby binaural sub level because I like the way it sounds on the speakers. Like, well, that's not the way people hear things. It's just like if you could do a mix on speakers in stereo that doesn't really work on headphones in stereo. Like if you have lots of hard pan stuff that plays on its own, that's horrible. It actually physically hurts when you listen in headphones, when there's audio here and nothing there, because that's not the way sound works. So your brain gets really pissed off and it thinks one of your ears is broken, and that's why it hurts, why it feels like it's getting sucked out of your head. So you can't do that. Whereas on speakers, that sounds awesome. And it's one of the reasons when I'm mixing in stereo, I've got a stereo spreader on my mix bus, just spreading it a little bit, because then if I hard pan, there's actually some out of phase information being fed back into the other ear. If I pan it 93 to the left, I think there's nothing in the right. But if I hard pan, which is easy and quick, then there is a little bit, so you never get that horrible sensation in the headphones. So everything about mixing in immersive is exactly the same. You have to know it's going to translate, because that's the gig.
It works.
When you mix in headphone, do you use the personalized HRT?
Yes. If you can get a personalized HRTF, do it. Dolby has an app, Apple has an app. It makes a huge difference. I mean, so the HRTF is the head-related transfer function, and it's supposed to be mimicking what would happen if sound is coming from there. It hits this ear, gets collected by your outer ear, the pinna, and gets into this ear canal, into the eardrum. But then what happens as it goes around your head to the other ear? And everybody's head is different. Everybody's ears are totally different. Everybody's left and right ears are totally different. So if you think there's this one generic HRTF that was come up with in research 20 years ago or something like that, and then I think it was updated again. But it's ridiculous. It would be like if they made clothes in one size and just said, go for it. Everybody wears the exact same size clothes. That's not going to work. So if you can personalize the HRTF, absolutely do it. Because they use, I mean, in Apple's is kind of amazing. I don't know if Dolby's does this as well, but Apple's uses the same camera that does the Face ID. So it's an actual 3D scan of the pinna. And it's really, really good. It makes a gigantic difference for being able to localize. Yeah.
Have you tried doing an Atmos mix in Logic?
No, I just don't know Logic well enough, and I've got scripts, and yeah, I will never mix in anything other than Pro Tools until something changes drastically, because I know it inside out, and it's quick.
That's kind of how I feel about Logic, and I'm reluctant to go back to Pro Tools just
Then
for
don't.
this. But I don't. All of the knowledge I'm getting is with Pro Tools tools, and so
It doesn't matter. I mean, the tools are the tools, and well, Spanner is just a plugin.
Well, I mean the stock stuff. I guess I could use the Dolby. Can I use the Dolby render with Logic instead of the built-in?
You could. I don't know why you'd bother really, but you
Yeah.
could. Yeah.
Just to wrap my head around it better, because they don't show you all the routing in Logic.
Yeah, but if you don't need to see it, that's kind of cool because it's a hell of a lot of routing. So, yeah, but no reason not to do it in Logic. If that's what you know. Don't make your life hard.
Right.
It's hard enough mixing anyway. So,
Do you have a stereo version we could compare the binaural to a stereo?
I have the stereo version. How are we going to hear that? Okay, here's what we can do. Is I can put this to the 712 mix bus, can't I?
Yeah.
I don't even know where it is. Let's just search for it. So if I solo this, so it's a little more wraparound, but let me play towards the end when it gets really kind of crazy. And let's see, who knows, maybe the stereo is better. You can hear how much more space there is for things. It's kind of crazy.
It was a really cool illustration of what we were talking about before, where like when the low cello, like when it went to the binaural, the energy, it started the energy, but all of a sudden it was like
Yeah,
like
it's
a-
around you. I
it was
mean,
like a
and
bubble.
and the quiet parts of the song really don't sound very different at all. But you can also hear how I'm coming up against the limiter in the stereo version.
Yes.
You know, and that's cool. But yeah, it's so open. When this thing gets loud, it doesn't matter. It's just loud. I mean, you know, and you got to turn the damn headphones down because it's pretty loud. But yeah, it's completely different. So it gets loud. That's what I was trying to say. Like, it's more beautiful, but it still feels exactly the same.
Yeah, totally.
Like, you would never say, oh, wait, hold on, I don't remember it being like that or whatever. And on speakers, I mean, this one is particularly Atmos-y. But there are some things where you're like, are you doing anything? Really? And then you switch to the stereo and it all just collapses. And that's great too, where you can sort of leave it being a stereo experience and everybody thinks they're just hearing the speakers they're looking at. But there's actually enough stuff built so that you put it into a world without having to fly stuff around the back of your head, because that can be very distracting and it might be the wrong choice. But when you can really make it so that when you go back to the stereo, you feel sad, I think that's, you've won. And it's much more difficult in headphones. I was actually worried, like, okay, this is going to sound like crap because it's only the binaural and blah, blah, blah. But I still think there's a huge amount of room in the Atmos version.
Very cool. Thanks for doing
So,
that.
thanks for suggesting.
If we do that way, is it actually the cross-faded version? What we hear is
Well, what you're hearing is the binaural output of the renderer in real time.
I mean, we just listen the stereo version.
Yeah, so the stereo version, what's happening is it's going to the left and right channels of the mix bus, and that mix bus is set to off. So it's absolutely just the stereo mix. Those channels go straight through the renderer with no processing whatsoever. The binaural processing only happens on things that are set to near, mid, or far. So if that's one of the things is when people are starting to mix in Atmos and they're like freaked out by what they hear in headphones, they'll generally keep turning stuff off and off. And I was talking to somebody like, man, I think I finally figured out the Atmos headphone thing. I just set everything to off and it sounds great. Like, well, yeah, but that's your stereo mix. There is zero processing for headphones at that point. And actually, this mix bus, I believe, is, hold on, where is it? We look at this. So this mix bus is set to off for the left, center, right, and the wides, which are sitting right outside. So I've got a 5-speaker front wall that's all set to off. But as soon as I pan it to the sides on this particular version of my template, it goes to mid. So I'm putting some spatialization in everything that isn't panned to the front. Just because otherwise, so much stuff ends up staying in that mix bus that like nothing was ever getting binauralized. So That's the way I did it then. Now I have a mix bus for each distance setting.
And those are independent of the speaker mix bus you were saying?
No, all of this goes to the renderer, which then, if I was set up for 914 or whatever, there would be a 914 output from the renderer. But there's no binaural processing on the speaker output.
Ah, got it.
So those distances that I'm setting up here are only for the binaural.
That's just like telling it data on what to do when the
Yeah,
binaural-
when you make the binaural,
Okay.
make this somehow sound further away.
Gotcha.
And even Dolby would say, like, it's not as simple as further away, because further away would EQ it would put delay on it, and it would put reverb on it, and more reverb than early reflections the further you went away. And if you do that, you're destroying the mix. Like, that won't work at all. So it's a conceptual thing to say, basically, how much spatialization shall I put on it? And it goes from none to some.
Do you find that the spatialization affects like the balances, like the volume balances of tracks?
It can, yeah. But the thing is, like, if you do the mix on speakers for 4 hours, and then you're like, okay, wait, I better check the headphones. And you go check the headphones, like, wow, that's kind of crazy. And you adjust something, and then go back to the speakers, you're fine. I've never had anything where it's like, all right, I guess I have to decide which one of these I will go with. Something that will sound fine on the speakers but crazy in the headphones, there's always room. So you fix it on the headphones and then go back to speakers, and I don't think I've ever had anything where I'm like, oh, well, that sucks. Now I really have to make a decision here. It never happens. And I start all of my Atmos mixes in headphones. I do all the prep and the setup and the initial panning, and I don't externalize at all. If I pan something to the back, it still sounds like it's in the front. If I set it to far, it just sounds like it's being processed. Like, it doesn't work at all for me. But you know, kind of like, oh, that might be cool in the back, this might be cool on the sides, and I'll set up what I think will work. But also what that means is my balance is already going for the headphone version, and when I switch to the speakers, I don't really need to change much. So then it's about fine-tuning stuff, finding the effects that might be cool, then go back to the headphones, and did I just swamp that thing with reverb by putting extra reverb in 5 other speakers or whatever. But by starting in headphones, I've never had an issue going back to headphones. So I'd recommend it. I mean, mixing Atmos just in headphones, it's not a good idea. It's in the long run, you have to hear it on speakers to really know what's going on, and that can be difficult. But like, if you're mixing a whole record and you can get enough money out of whatever the budget is, even if it's a friend just paying you $50 a song or whatever, to get into somebody's room for 3 hours, hear your mixes on speakers, and like, oh, okay. And if you do that, just make sure that you bring a couple of mixes that you know, just like you would if you're going into track at a studio. Really quickly listen to those, go, yeah, okay, this sounds good, or wow, this sounds crazy. I'm gonna not spend my money and I'm gonna find somewhere else to go. And then you can hear them and you'll immediately just take some notes, and then you can go fix it on headphones and be assured that it'll work or whatever. But yeah, you'd have to get to speakers at some point. But I mean, I do a lot of my stereo mixing on headphones too. So it's not, I've got nothing against it. You're wearing your studio on your head. It's reproducible, you can travel with it. It's small. It blocks out other noise. Like, it's, and also, like, psychologically for me, I put more pressure on myself when I'm on the speakers. When I'm in headphones, it's like, well, I know I'm gonna put this on the speakers at some point, so I'm just screwing around here. And I might get 90% of the way through a mix without ever going on the speakers. I go on the speakers, like, okay, now this has to be amazing. But I've already done a lot of the work. I'm not kind of stuck from the beginning on speakers, because for me that freaks it out.
Sorry to interrupt. Do you find yourself being more cavalier on headphones in some ways? Because of that, like,
Yeah,
casual
I mean,
sense?
possibly, sometimes, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, because that's the only way you'll do anything. You can do stuff that's interesting without taking any chances, but anything that like will make a lasting impression or really push the song over the edge for people or whatever, is to try stupid stuff and be fine if it doesn't work. And so you've got to be in a mindset where you feel like you're still in the playground and there's no real jeopardy to it, and you can't fail because you're just trying stuff out. And for me, that's why I'm in headphones. Like, it's, nothing's going on. I can do whatever the hell I want.
That's awesome. That's a sandbox.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you were mentioning sometimes you cheat like the top of a drum set to the height speakers. Would that be just through like panning overheads, or would that be through those like widener effects in the height channel?
It completely depends. I don't think I'm doing, let me see. Oh yeah, I am. So, Nugent, they make that Viz LM thing, which was measuring the level before. This plugin is fucking awesome. Nugent Halo, and they've just updated it to do wider track widths as well. So take a stereo in and then tell it, I want 712 out, and then you can change how much will go to the center, how much will go front and back, how much will go all the way to the back, and how much will go up top. So if we listen to, I think this is just on the wind chimes. Oh, actually, here's a better one. There's one on the sitar drone. So you can see and I can and the great thing about this plugin is that it folds back down to exactly what you put into it. So it's not doing weird phase stuff, it just makes decisions about what should go to what speaker. So if this is on a track that's going to something set to off, it will sound exactly the same as it would if you didn't have the plugin on. But as soon as you get on the speakers, it is everywhere. So I'll use something like this if I'm given a like a stereo lead vocal stem that has all the effects on it. I'll put one of these on there because it will split the effects to the back because they're the decorrelated things. So it'll leave the vocal pretty much in the middle. But what I'll usually do is I'll make a copy of the vocal track. So one copy of the vocal track is just left alone, exactly how it is, and then another copy of the vocal track is like this, but I just mute the, you have to set the mode to mute, I don't even remember where you do it, but you just, well here, you just set it like this, no, not like that, like this, and now the left, center, right, and the LFE are muted. So it's made a decision about, hey, the clean stuff should go to the front, but I don't care. I'm not hearing that. I'm only hearing the decorrelated stuff to the rears and the heights. So now I have exactly the same vocal effects, but I have them around the room. And then all you have to do is make sure that when you collapse down to stereo, it doesn't have too much effects now, because that will have more than it would have otherwise. But it's a great way to take something that's stereo that you really want to spread around without having to completely change it or swamp it in new effects. So this plugin is awesome, and I need to ask them about this stupid graphics thing. I'm going to get him over here in a minute when we finish.
And what is so that sitar track is routed to like a 7, what's the output bus and what's the
mix?
panning?
It's routed to the mix bus,
Okay.
and because you're routed to a 712, it's just automatically hard panned. Like the output of this plugin goes to the channels. You don't get a panner.
And if that plugin was bypassed,
It's
you
just
hadn't
you
adjusted
can
the
see it.
panning.
It's just a stereo track.
Yeah. But before you decided to use that plugin, what was your panning idea for that? Or you
My
never-
panning idea was to put that plugin on it. Yeah, from the very beginning.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now I was going to ask you that question. You said this song you produced and mixed, right? So during the production phase, do you have like an Atmos mindset, or are you thinking of where things are going to
More
move?
and more I do now. I didn't
do?
used to at all. I mean, 6 months into doing the Atmos mixes, I still didn't. But it's like learning how to mix all over again, but you already know how the tools work. So it's a really weird place to live. But yeah, even while I'm doing stereo mixes now, there'll be times when I'm like, oh, God damn it, I can't do that thing that I know would be amazing because this is the stereo mix. So you build up tools, and my Atmos template has things that I wish I could use in stereo, but you can't. So sometimes you're just making a list in your head for later, and sometimes you just find things. Like the panning on the string quartet, that all happened while I was doing the Atmos mix. I didn't have that in mind
Okay,
before.
good. So I was thinking about that. producing
Yeah.
a quartet, like, this is going to go over here. This is going to go.
Yeah, I mean, when I did the stereo mix of this song, it was only a vague plan that eventually I would go back and redo the catalog in Atmos. So I wasn't really thinking about it. But now when I mix in stereo, especially if I know I'm going to do the Atmos, I'm constantly like wishing I could do some of the Atmos stuff in stereo. Definitely. I think we got 4 minutes. All right. Are we, oh yeah, because other people have to come in and we got to clean. And I need to get I got to get a Nugent guy over here for a second. So, all right, well, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.